The VRARA Association is a global association with chapters all over the world. In fact, there's 70 chapters around the world, and just even maybe a year and a half ago, there's like 54. So in the last year, there have been like 15 new chapters that have been founded around the world. What's really great about the association is there are committees that meet weekly and a chance for you to connect with like-minded individuals ranging across all verticals, from defense to entertainment to storytelling to retail and many, many more. And there are also a lot of other ways to connect and communicate and share. The Global Association has a Slack channel that you can all be a part of. There's also, we'll talk about it a little bit later, there's also a Alberta chapter Slack channel where you can connect locally with members in the industry in Alberta. When we look at some of the membership opportunities, there's different kind of tiers to become a member within the association. And I'm not going to go through this. And if there are people who are interested afterwards, feel free to reach out to anyone on the board who I'll introduce who they are shortly to get more information. But basically, it goes all the way down from a startup, so pre-fund or pre-revenue or no revenue, up to larger members. And really, what's really exciting is to see the acceptance and adoption and participation from large organizations around the world. Here's just an example of some of the organizations who are members or sponsors of the association. And just this past week, I don't know if you saw in the news, but Unity Technologies actually became a member of the VR Association. We'll be working closely with the association to develop workshops and industry connections and all those kind of things. So it's a really great association to work with and connect with. And we're happy to have Red Iron Labs as a member of the association within Alberta here. So one of the things that the association as a global focus has is really about promoting networking, promoting services, promoting their members, building that knowledge base. And so that's one of the things with the committees I mentioned earlier, is if you are in a particular vertical, whether it's healthcare, training, defense, construction, and you're faced with some challenges that you're trying to figure out how to maybe roll out a product or implement or even just envision, you can use these committees to connect with and share and gain some ideas and some insights. And then also finally to look at responsibility and being able to create these best practices guides and drive some of that direction. And so if you are of interest in these kind of opportunities here, it's a great way to help shape this growing industry. Even though it's been around, for quite a while, it's still kind of in that new stage here. So there's a lot of opportunity to help shape the industry going forward here. So here again are some of the best practice documents that have been created in the past. So arcades and venues, education, storytelling, and there's many more. And there's your opportunity as members to be able to participate in developing. In fact, there was an education best practices guide put out a year or so ago, and Lethbridge College was able to be a part of that and have their presence made known and a chance to showcase the work that we're doing at Lethbridge College. I just want to give a shout out to a couple of events that are happening. So the VRARA Global Summit happens twice a year, and it used to be in person, and hopefully we'll get back to that someday. But for the last year, it's been online. And so there's a North American and a Europe instance. The North American one happens in June. And you can find out the details at the URL below, vrarglobalsummit.com. And then the European one happens in the fall, but you can attend both of them. It's just that in the North American, you'll probably find more kind of North American companies partnering and vendoring in those. So that's the one you want to check out. And then the other one that's coming up really quickly here in a couple of weeks is the VRARA Enterprise Forum. The link to join to sign up is below. And if you want to get information about this or you forget the link, just reach out to one of us on the board and we can direct you to that. Here's just a little quote. Shell Games is one of the larger kind of entertainment game companies, education companies in the US. And just a little quote talking about their value that they've seen from being members of the VRARA Association. So I want to talk a little bit about our local Alberta chapter. It's been around for, I think, 3 or 4 years, but in my role as the president, I think it's only been about 2 years. And we've really, over the last 2 years, have tried to really accelerate the growth and connectivity of our ecosystem in Alberta here. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're trying to do. But first, I want to kind of talk and introduce our board. So you met Christy, who's our MC for the night. Thank you. And David Dukakis, who's on the call and works at Red Iron Labs as well as our membership chair. Clint Dietz, which I'm not sure if he's on the call or not, he might be, is our vice president. He's out of Edmonton. And then Lynn is our policy support and analyst, sorry, and I believe she's based out of Calgary. And so without the support and contribution of our board members, it would be really difficult to carry out events like this, but also be able to drive some of the initiatives that we have in play here. So some of our mission statement that we've worked together as a board to try to establish is really to empower our VR AR community. So that's our Alberta community, and it's really growing. There's a lot of innovation that's happening. I see so much in the news. You know, Scope AR just announced their web-based kind of AR platform, which is great to hear. So there's lots that we want to really showcase and empower us to be able to continue to drive that innovation forward. We want to be able to ignite the spatial computing transformation. And that's really about trying to raise awareness to organizations who maybe aren't involved in the XR community about the values and the benefits that those technologies can deliver to their organizations, and help them see that and really get that fire going so we can see that growth that we all need and want to see. We want to be able to connect the local needs. So what you guys as potential members and organizations within Alberta, what you need, but also connecting that to our global resources through the Global VR AR Association and our network of connections. We want to be able to bring Alberta technology to the world. Again, I mentioned the example of Scope AR. That's just one. There's tons of great examples. I know, I can't remember the company name. I have to apologize, but VisWorks, the company that kind of offshoot from them, is a really great example of some of the AR work that's being done in the area of process construction. So we want to be able to showcase that to the world and help with that. And then we want to be able to create this supportive and collaborative system. And just before the session, David and Christy were talking about just how they've recognized, you know, within this VR AR industry, that there's a lot of that willingness to be collaborative and supportive, maybe more than other industries. We want to just be able to continue to promote that and allow that to happen. Thank you, Dallas, for the name. So Pantopica, and I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but yes, we want to be able to showcase companies and products like that to the world. So if you're interested in connecting locally within Alberta on Slack, here's the URL for our Slack channel that we've got for our Alberta XR developers, or just even if you're not a developer, if you're an enthusiast, if you're have a vested interest in this medium and this technology, join us on this platform, and we'd love to engage in conversation with you. All right. So Lloyd Summers is, I don't even know how to describe it. When I think of Lloyd, I think of amazing, and we've had a long relationship, Lloyd and I. Before the VR program even existed, I taught in our multimedia production program, and I knew of Lloyd back then. So this is probably 2 or 3 years ago, and in the multimedia production program, we have a practicum, and we had a number of students who Lloyd graciously hosted. I believe there was 4. There was a marketer and an artist and a 3D modeler. And in fact, the 3D modeler is back at Red Iron, Brady Hardy, and actually was one of the dev team members on Muffin Fight. So really happy to see that. But ever since then, we've had a really great relationship. He's volunteered to speak to my classes in VR and in Zoom. He's always willing to help us out, and really is the epitome of what our ecosystem or our industry is about. You know, we talked about how the VR AR industry is collaborative and supportive and helpful, and I really feel like Lloyd Summers is the epitome of that. And so without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Lloyd to share some of his insights on how video game design concepts can be applied to create high quality safety training and industrial training in VR. So thank you again, Lloyd, for taking some time with us today.
Thank you. Wow, that's going to be hard to follow that up. That was really heartwarming. Thank you, Mike. And for those of you who don't know, Mike's always been championing through XR. right from the beginning, I think everything that's come out of Lethbridge in terms of XR, Mike's had some hand in, if not Calgary and Edmonton as well. And to me, he's always been a visionary. So that introduction meant a lot to me, and I just want to say thank you. Before I jump into the presentation, I do want to do a quick land acknowledgement, if that's okay. And starting that, I just want to say, so we were super fortunate before starting Red Iron to have met Elder Sheldon Firstrider, who has put tireless effort into mentoring us and teaching us and helping us learn about the Blackfoot way of life. And we've done some amazing projects together, especially around language revitalization. And I would strongly encourage anybody who has spare time to look up the Blackfoot Language Revival Project and follow Sheldon and see some of the things he's done. He's been teaching Blackfoot language for over 30 years, including at Glenbow. And in the spirit of that, he also wrote for us our land acknowledgement that we use. And I just wanted to read that out to everybody. So, and in the spirit of reconciliation, we honor and acknowledge Mohkinstsis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina Nation. We acknowledge that this territory is the home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, with the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We acknowledge all nations, Indigenous and non, who live, work, play, and help us steward this land, honor, and celebrate this territory. And I just thought that those words are so powerful. If you know Elder Sheldon Firstrider, he believes that everybody on the territory, Treaty 7 territory, belongs at Treaty 7 territory, and that no matter where you come from, by being here, you become Blackfoot in a way. And he's just an inspiration to our whole company. And so thank you for letting me have that opening segue. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start a bit of a presentation for everybody. Hopefully this is an interesting, we'll say, presentation for lack of a better word. So yeah, I'm going to talk a lot about, I guess this has to switch. Does it not? Because you're looking at, where is that? Swap. Is that better? Thumbs up? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
that's good.
All right, because that's all you're going to get out of me. So, so yeah, we're Red Iron Labs. I'll kind of talk very quickly about some of the stuff we do, but really the focus of my presentation is about gamification and the importance. So before Red Iron, I had created over 240 or something at the time mobile apps and games. We used that as a basis for how we founded Red Iron about just over 5 years ago now. And since then, I think I've probably worked on 30 to 40 different industrial XR applications that have come out of our studio or that we've built on behalf of other studios. So Red Iron is a Calgary studio. We have team members from Lethbridge, Calgary, Edmonton, Saskatchewan, and we also recently just opened up a US office. So I'm going to show you these slides more because I feel like I need to demonstrate that you know, there's some proof behind some of the design decisions that we make and where those values come from. So taking a quick look, some of the projects we're working on, one with Lethbridge College, which is especially meaningful to me, is dementia care working and caregiver, working with virtual aggressive dementia patients and trying to show people in a safe setting where they can try over and over again how to engage with, work with, and understand what it's like to go through a patient that's got aggressive dementia and how to work with them. Because as somebody who used to work in a medical field to some context, especially in the medical training that they give us, they cannot prepare you for what somebody's really like when it comes to mentation and how the brain works. And something that we found very interesting out of caregiver is that a lot of the work we're doing there applies in all kinds of industries. I'll kind of talk very briefly and say there's other things that we're working on, like Neuro Recover with the Foothills Hospital, which is stroke rehabilitation. We have a giant treadmill solution coming in that's going to be announced any day that we've started work on. I'm actually going to get footage from there tomorrow. It's all about recovery, health recovery, and there's all kinds of industries that we're pushing in here. We're also working pretty hard in safety training. This is especially common out of our US office with our partnership with 3D Media and coming through our US channel. So we do a lot of safety training for companies all over Canada and the US because it's a lot cheaper to burn down a virtual warehouse than it is to burn down a real warehouse. And one of my favorite things was having a lead director at a very large energy company who we now have two consecutive or at the same time multi-year contracts with them doing development, because their director of safety put on the headset and he used a water extinguisher on an oil fire, burned down the virtual warehouse. And after that, we started making software for them long term. Getting into workplace training, again, similar, there's all kinds of critical safety training. This is a story that I think needs to come from our US sister studio, where Daryl, who leads 3D Media and it owns part of our Red Iron US that we're sharing, was working as a nuclear technician. One of his close friends wasn't trained fully, and within a month accidentally killed both himself and injured, I think, 56 or 57 people on the plant by making a mistake. And so the studio down there we have is almost entirely dedicated now to workplace safety training and trying to stop those incidents, because a 20-minute VR simulation could have saved that person's life. So obviously training is important and safety is important to me. And we are pretty heavy in safety training down there, and we're doing a lot of work with a lot of big companies. One other thing I want to mention is internally at our own products, we make a lot of games and a lot of things. Muffin Fight just launched, which is an amazing game. I love it. Brady worked on it. It was all Alberta staff who worked on this. And Brady, who's now in Saskatchewan, but he started in Lethbridge at the Lethbridge College. So I still count that as Alberta, just delayed. But even still, like, it doesn't really matter where people come from. The truth is they were all junior or entry level. If you look at their resume and what people say, they're like they're entry level, and they created an amazing game by just being given a little bit of encouragement. And our social VR solution here is something else you're going to see launching very soon, which is a meeting space where you can draw on the whiteboards, work together and present things. And yeah, it's just a virtual meeting room solution. And you're going to see that Red Iron this year is pushing extremely hard in multiplayer, multi-user. And what I kind of want to drive home is these are just some of the clients. This is kind of an old list, but we work on anywhere from about 8 to 10 projects, some really large projects per month. And we are extremely fortunate to be in that space. And it took a long time. I always reflect now on just one of our contracts now, I would have done anything for year one. And my heart goes out to all the studios that are in that position where you're trying to get that first big client. And what I want to say is that when you do manage that, when you do get that grant, don't worry, the rest are going to come. It's just getting that first one and doing a really good job improving yourself. It will break down those doors. So how does Red Iron get into all these industries? Because I showed you a very thin slice of the number of projects and clients we work with. And the question kind of comes up, why Red Iron? Why did they come to Red Iron? It's word of mouth. We have very little marketing. We have almost no effort put into sales, but we're growing and we're growing and we're growing. And the way that we do that is through gamification. And the history of Red Iron is we actually grew out of games and brought in, I don't want to go into too much detail. What I'll say is that when you're running your studio, try to get at least 3 pillars of revenue coming into your company. In our case, we have services, which is where we're building something for an energy company or something like that. Community, where we're working with a college or building something with a small startup. And then we have our products, which is stuff that we make. Try to keep those 3 streams coming in, because when something bad happens, you have multiple sources of revenue. So what is gamification and why does that matter? So I kind of want to break this down by breaking down a door that I've seen brought up before, where I've seen another game studio at a VR event, and I don't want to ever put them in the position of feeling lesser than, but there's some points that get overlooked that people don't realize that I think should be covered. And one is that coming out of gaming alone doesn't make you unique, and it doesn't mean that it's a good fit for industrial. And you need to understand, if you're on the client side, when it's a good fit and how to fit it in. So to be unique, you have to deliver content that pushes boundaries, remixes technology, fundamentally changes the way a business operates, or generating any kind of emotion. It has to be a unique experience. If it's not unique, then it's not unique. Like, I don't know how to really word that otherwise, but, and I'm going to get into this to talk about how gamification can be used to influence industrial work without it being something that doesn't make you unique because other people are doing it. And I'm going to go through and show you the things that we have found are extremely valuable in gamification, and things you might want to look out for that you think might be a good idea, but actually don't really resonate well with clients based on what we've seen. And before I get into the rest of the presentation, this is where I stop and I say, take everything with a grain of salt. Every client, every partner, every person is different. Every project is different. And I'm going to show you some generalized rules that we've learned, but that doesn't mean that they're the end all be all. This is just the opinion of one little studio working away on what we've learned. So this is an example how a gaming studio would tackle VR. They would use, this is actually our muffin fight, by the way. They'll use every button on the controller. They'll hide the controller and they'll show gloves. You'll see like little game things all over the place, a lot of noise, a lot of activity. But from an industrial client, this would be a failure because they've probably never used VR before. They're probably an engineer who doesn't understand an Xbox controller, and you're giving them two complex controllers and then hiding the interface from them. So a game studio would come through and build something very colorful and very interesting and complex, but they'll miss the mark if they don't make adjustments. And part of the reason I'm hammering on this isn't because I'm judging other people, it's because we've made the mistake of falling down these holes. So this is self-reflective. This isn't me speaking of other studios' work, although I'm sure it applies. An industrial studio goes the other way. They're going to have Navisworks, highly colorful imagery. And they're going to build something that's built around an outcome, not around a user. So they're there to show accurate, specific data with specific colors with specific tags. That works great in an industrial setting, but when you're trying to engage somebody in training or learning, this is a very cold atmosphere. It's not welcome, it's not warming, it's kind of offsetting to the eyes, it's a little uncomfortable to look at for a long time. A Navisworks 3D CAD model is good. Artists, for lack of a better term, would love this, but you go and put this on the manager and they're going to go, yeah, okay, I don't see the value, I'm not getting everything out of it. So where gamification comes in is a combination. So this is one of our simulations for Exxon, and you can see that it's got elements of architecture and it's got elements of the gamification high quality look. And the way that's done is by creating a perfect replication of their environment, putting control valves, showing information and stuff like that. And I'm going to get more into why that seemingly looks like a minor difference, but to a user makes a huge difference. And I'm going to kind of go into how that works, because if you present this to a client, you're going to have a very different reaction from when you present this to a client. And what I'll tell you is that when you present this to a client, they're going to come back to you every time. So one thing you need to remember when you're talking about gamification is learning. Games are about learning and reward and challenges. And this is very important to understanding how to sell VR into a studio, because VR can do something you can't do with other training platforms, especially online learning platforms. And most of you probably get this, so I'm just telling you what you already know. But gamification is, like I said, about rewarding, learning, and challenging, right? But everybody learns a bit differently, especially when we're talking about hands-on. So take somebody in the trades, a maintenance technician, an engineer who's working in the plant. They almost all learn hands-on. They don't learn to change oil on a car by watching videos. They learn by getting out a wrench and opening up, everything they need to drain out the oil and replace it. So when we're talking about VR, the one thing it does a great job of that's hard to catch anywhere else is the hands-on and now I'm going to stutter on the word, Hands-on learners, that's all you're getting out of me, sorry. I don't usually use technical terms. I'll tell people it's great for hands-on, it's great for getting accurate sound in a realistic 3D environment, and it's great for visual learners. But if you want to make somebody sit there and read a book, it's not going to be the right fit. So that's my way of tackling it, is knowing that I always need, in every experience, everything I do has to handle touch, it has to handle audio, and it has to handle visual. And that's our checklist for success and failure on our projects at Red Iron. Reading and writing, it's important to be there, but it's really hard to predict what their headset quality is and whether or not they can read something accurately. So please don't rely on it if you're going down that path. And those learning styles are going to drive everything we're about to talk about in gamification. So inputs, controllers, I mentioned this before. If you have somebody who's only going to be playing for 5 to 15 minutes, they're not going to have time to memorize all of the buttons on one of these remotes. They just don't have that kind of time. So show them on the remote as you go through what buttons they now need to use and learn about as they unroll the experience. Vibrate it, make it pop out with text, make it make sound so that they know when they press that. If you follow those through, they will naturally, through regular learning, like you would in the real world, start to understand how those buttons map to the real world. And we find, interestingly enough, that before we started doing it this way and walking them through the buttons, probably 1 in 2 engineers would get confused. And what we're finding now is that we haven't had a single person not understand the controls in one of our industrial projects in several years. So it sounds like a minor thing, but it makes a world of difference. So keep the controls on screen. And like I said, touch in on the different learning types. One thing that's a success or fail for us in our QA and internally is a user should fail because they couldn't learn the content. They should never fail because they couldn't find the button on a controller. So if we ever hear or think or look or review footage or training and we see that they couldn't figure out the controls, we failed as a VR company. That's not their fault. That's our failure, not their failure. So 9 times out of 10, I will not allow our team to use more than 2 buttons on a controller. The gamification component of that is you build the games around your users. You wouldn't make something really complex for a young player, or you wouldn't make something overly complex for an engineer who doesn't have time to learn your inputs. And I know this is kind of lectury, but that's what you're getting because you got me here talking, so you have no choice. Next is environments, right? Obviously, we love our look and feel. We come out of game studios, so environments are important. But there's things in environments that people forget to do. And these are highly attractive lighting. Get lens flares, get light coming in as sun rays. Put that extra bit in there. Use particle systems, fog, smoke and wind. All of our machinery that we put in VR has sound and vibrates and makes noise and operates like machinery, and when they get near it, it does stuff so that they get kind of excited and it feels realistic. We'll use 360 images. We'll send a crew down to Exxon. We have a crew there that goes to Exxon every few weeks and captures the new simulation we're doing in 360 so that we can take those decals and those images and map it onto our walls so that when an engineer puts their headset on, they feel like they're at work. They don't feel like they're in a game. They don't feel like they're in a Navisworks. They feel like they're at their day job. And that's kind of our success failure. I determine success and failure as it's successful if I find that there's a suggestion from the user that they want to go beyond the simulation and explore that environment. Or when I hear them say, that looks just like our windsock, that looks just like this thing. I burnt my arm on this once. I can't believe you got that in there. Those are the moments you have successes, and you got to really aim for those. The other thing about gamification is remembering games are typically about the story, and industrial is typically about truth, where a gamified industrial solution is actually about the user. Everything else is secondary. It doesn't matter how accurate your environment is. It doesn't matter how accurate your steps are. I've found that the industrial users will make a lot of concessions for the work you do as long as they are enjoying it and it's built around them and they're actually learning the fundamentals of what they need to learn. So remember to tell them a story, use quality voiceovers, have indicators. We typically have, everything, the whole environment unfolds as you go along. and it shows you where you need to go and what you need to do. And it tells you about the facility, and it tells you, why does this machine exist? What do you use it for? And allow them to unroll that the way that they want to learn, because not everybody wants to follow the process sheet. Some people want to understand, what does this switch do, even though it's not on my process sheet? And it's really good to be able to tell them if that's a good switch or a bad switch to press and why, and kind of allow them to learn that on their own a little bit. So it's all about giving them the ability to do a little bit of learning on their own. And I'll get more into that in a bit. The one thing I want to kind of highlight here is NPCs. Now, in this particular case, we're using a robotic looking NPC that's not by accident. This particular simulation has a critical failure where people die in real life if it's not followed. We don't want to show real people dying, so we show robotic android looking people to try to prevent somebody from getting triggered if we can. The flip side is, this is different than any other industry with one very small thing, and that's in VR. You can tell if somebody's making eye contact. So all of our NPCs blink, head nod, look at you, they'll turn towards you, they'll follow you, some of our games and stuff like that, they greet you, they'll talk to you. And it's because you don't want somebody to feel like it's a hollow experience. Almost every simulation we get, the first thing they do is reach out and try to open a drawer. And it's like, well, why not let them open the drawer, even if it has no purpose? Because the flip side, going back to that Navisworks example, if you're in a cold environment, nothing's recognizing you, it's not looking at you, it's not talking to you, you can't interact with anything, you're going to walk away from that feeling like you just weren't there. It's going to not be any more valuable than looking at pictures. But when you can get in there and engage, and it tells a story and things recognize you and you feel welcome, it's going to change kind of the way you perceive it. And subconsciously, this is why they call us back. It's not because they know why we did the best simulation. They haven't figured out why. And the reason they did is because the environment's been talking to them the entire time. And the final one I'm going to talk about is freedom of choice and freedom of the experience. So remember that for most people, it's their first time in VR. They might have done it once or twice before, but usually in a very limited context. So make it fun, but give them the choice to deviate. But there's one thing I learned when I was at GDC, which is from gaming, which is called, Do You Want to Be a Wizard? Look up that talk one day and you'll find it fascinating. But a company, I can't remember who they were, created a game, and they found that people just wouldn't play it. You had to make choices to start the game, and people would just refuse to make the choices. So it waits a certain amount of time, and if you don't make a decision, it finally interrupts you and says, look, do you want to be a wizard or not? Because if you do, you got to pick up the wand and cast a spell. And that's how we engage VR. So before we let the VR thing start, they have to interact with something. We don't let it start without them making the choice to engage the environment, because as soon as they do that, they make that connection of it being a trade-off, and they realize the environment is reactive. If you don't do that, they're going to, again, disengage and feel like they were kind of like walk through a movie that they may not have been paying attention to. So make them make the conscious decision to participate. And when that happens, they're going to start building meaningful memories, because they're especially hands-on learners, because they're the ones who get overlooked with web the most. When you make them make the conscious decision to participate, 9 times out of 10, they're going to remember that for probably the rest of their life, the first time that they went through and did that. So I also see a spelling mistake that's going to bug me later. But the last thing I'll say is, this is a good opportunity to use gamification to reward the user. So in our Exxon sims, one of the reasons they love our sims, I think, is after they've completed the simulation, it gives them a choice to restart. But if they don't, they can walk around the entire facility. There's nothing to stop them from going and flipping switches and playing and just enjoying it. So they get rewarded for their 10-minute of simulation by having an open source thing that they can do. And what we find is, as soon as everybody goes home for the night, a lot of the staff will at some point put on the headset, complete the sim just so they can walk around. So you're kind of like using reward systems and freedom to teach them how to pass a simulation so that they can get to their reward point. And I feel like for us as a company, one of the things going forward is for us to figure out how to expand on that reward system, because it's interesting because you're getting people to do and learn that normally have very little interest for a self-interest point. So that's it. That's my entire presentation. I tried to keep it to a handful of points and not lecture too much. Hopefully some of that was valuable. And yeah, I think that's everything I have to say at the moment. I'm also having a fabulous hair day. So thank you, everybody.
You're definitely having a good hair day. Looks very luscious.
Thank you. I
Thanks so
may have
much.
had help with it.
So that brings us to the next portion of the evening. Thank you so much for that amazing talk. We're going to move into some questions and answers. I have a few that I wrote down I definitely want to ask you. And
Sure.
if you have any questions from the audience, I'd just like to request that you just put a little note in the chat. I'll see that and I'll call your name. So my first question is an easy one. What is your favorite project that you've worked on? You've worked on so many different projects, over 200 mobile titles and games.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a favorite?
Yeah, so my favorites change all the time because you go back and you reflect and you play something. My latest favorite game is called RPG Quest, which we just relaunched for Android. So that's why it's my recent favorite. It's a 0-player game, so you can't do anything. The game plays itself, and that's the fun of it, is you install it and you watch it go and play and fight in dungeons. And you can't interrupt that. You just watch it, and then that's the game. And so it's kind of funny to me. But I would say my favorite project that we've worked on is probably on the industrial side. It's called Decanting, but it's a really realistic one where you have to like make a lot of changes, and it's just a lot of fun because the environment and the sound and all the effects are really good. And then on the game side, Muffin Fight is by far my favorite game right now. Like, I try to play it every other day, and I can only play for about 20 minutes before I'm out of breath, and it has taken up my exercise. So
That's definitely on my download list for sure.
excellent. Yeah, it's a great game. So yeah, that's my favorite one at the moment.
Amazing. I was curious, when it comes to VR development, what is preferable for you to use, Unity or Unreal, or do you build your own development engine?
Yeah, and this will be a longer answer, but I think it's such a good question. So I'm going to say what the CEO of Unity said about 3 years ago, which is Tim Sweeney, epic, absolutely brilliant man. I'm not going to use the same swear words that they did, but because I can't, but he's brilliant. Both have a different audience and a different platform. It's really tough because as a developer, Unity is much easier to work with. As a small business, Unreal has a big attention because it drives really attractive looking stuff. And it's kind of has a smarter approach. So Unity, you have to like go all the way from picking your VR framework. On Unreal, it's built in, so you're not really picking that. It's more like you're building the process. And then company to company, there's values that are important. So Epic puts a lot of their money into Epic Mega Grants, into really bettering a community, where Unity is a bit more money focused. So they will, go and, take contracts, and like they kind of fight with small and medium businesses a little bit on the contracting side, which I'm not a big fan of because they're turning around and charging for software, but then taking contracts away. And it's not so much a challenge that we deal with day to day, but where that's a concern for me is the little tiny shop of 2 people that's trying to get out the door. Like, how are they going to compete with $1 billion studio? And so that blurring makes me a little nervous, but that said, as a developer, Unity's probably, I think they're sitting in at 50% of the market share. I think Unreal's sitting in at like 20 to 30% of the VR market share, and then the rest are everybody else. So really, as a developer, you need to know Unity, but it's valuable to know both.
So would you say that your developers that you work with at Red Iron Labs, they have a mix of talent for both Unreal and Unity?
Yeah, we're probably 60-40 right now. So 60% Unity, well, more like 60-30, 10% other. So, because we'll work a little bit with like robotics and all kinds of weird things. So we're a little bit all over the place, but yeah, I'd say probably 60% of our work is Unity, which is significant. It's certainly not something you want to shy away from. And it uses C# as a base language now. before it used to have 3 different languages, then it went to 2, and now it's pretty much just C#. But C# is a much easier language to learn than like C++. It's a little more strongly typed than JavaScript. So I find that it's just more natural for people to learn as a language. So Unity is probably easier to learn with. But if you don't know coding at all, Unreal is going to be easier because it doesn't require coding. It's got a graph-based programming language. So you connect little graphs together to build your solution. So yeah.
So I'm assuming that there might be a couple students here, some programmers, some developers learning and wanting to seek out opportunities in VR. Where does Red Iron get its talent from, and where do you look for in future hires from the development side?
Yeah, great question. So we, in Calgary, we're pretty much hiring almost entirely from Lethbridge College. We got some students from the EDAC before it got closed, which is the Edmonton Digital Art College, I think it was called, which was fantastic. I'm sad to see that go because it's not good enough to just get a 3D modeler. Like some of our 3D modelers come, like one came from EA, and it was a real challenge because what you can get away with in a AAA studio doesn't work at a VR studio because we have to really performance base our stuff. You take somebody who's trained to do 3D modeling for mobile and it's a good fit because they've learned how to optimize. But Lethbridge College has been fantastic. Obviously, I have a preference and bias for Lethbridge College because we have a long relationship there. There are some other programs popping up quickly that are coming out of like 3 other schools, but they're more like a short boot camp. And we'll kind of like see where those go. One is a boot camp actually we're doing for SAIT that's going to be starting in May. That's a 12-week boot camp where they learn everything. And I'm going to push them hard because I'm going to be in there making sure that they learn 3D modeling, they learn how to build stuff, and that by the end they have a portfolio that will get them at least interest. I'd like to see everybody get hired, but that's a discussion for another day. So, but Lethbridge College is where we get most of our team members from. EDAC or local communities. So CGDA, YYC Design and Development Slack Group, Alberta Rainforest. We don't post jobs on Indeed or LinkedIn or places like that. We insist that all of our jobs get passed through word of mouth and come out of a community so that we're really looking for that. Once in a blue moon, and then I'm done, is we do also hire through Game Jam. So I'm sad that Global Game Jam this year was online because usually we go to Global Game Jam. I'll look for somebody who's done a really impressive job on a game and we'll see if we can't steal them to come work at Red Iron. So
amazing. Quick plug for Lethbridge College. If anybody's looking for some quality VR AR developing talent, Mike McCready over, I don't know where he is on my screen, on your screen, but reach out to him. He knows his stuff.
Yes, and Lethbridge College is a year-long dedicated course. It's going to take you a lot farther than a boot camp. A boot camp will be good to get you learning and get you going, but there's only so much you can learn on a short schedule like that. Going through an actual lengthy course, like Lethbridge College has a bunch of instructors that I know are phenomenal. Allison, Tyler, it's a phenomenal group to learn from, and I just can't say enough about how amazing they are and how high they set the bar for teaching XR in Alberta. So,
but I love that you're doing the intensive course yourself. You're implementing that and giving back to the community, really. Like we were talking about earlier, like Mike mentioned, it's a very supportive community here in Alberta. Are there other ways that you recommend that people get involved with VR AR if they're interested, if they want to pique interest in their friends?
Yeah, I think like the biggest misconception I think with AR VR is that we've had quite a few people who say, I don't know enough about coding to get in. I don't know enough about all of that. And what they don't realize is VR AR isn't coding, it's multimedia the next level. It's basically 360 videos based on old 260 or like 2D videos. It's 3D environments based on old 2Ds. Like it's the next evolving step of multimedia. So if you're good at art and and coming up with ideas and being creative, you can learn the little bit of code snippets. Somebody mentioned in the chat, and I think this is a good point, there is also Bolt. There's, I think, 4 or 5 codeless solutions for Unity. Unreal has blueprints built right in, which work brilliant. You don't need to learn coding. You can download sample projects. The really complex math is stripped away by the game engines these days. Like, I don't have to get into even trigonometry sometimes. For example, the other day I had a small math problem and I went and Googled it and I'm like, how do and go and do all of this, and I look it up and I get like a grade 6 textbook, and it's like, yeah, okay. And that's the most complex problem I had this week. So I think that people get nervous about what they think they're going to need to know, but really everything these days, you can Google your way through it if you're patient. So I'd say my biggest advice to them is don't be afraid to try. Unity by default, if you drag a bunch of stuff in there and you have a headset plugged in, press play, you'll already be seeing it in VR. You don't even have to write a line of code. You just press a button. So there's no reason to not try, and just kind of put that faith forward and believe in yourself, and you'll get there. I'm self-taught, and if I can do it, then anybody can do it. So.
Awesome. Well, we have a question from the audience here. Dylan Day Millwright, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sure. So as you can probably, that was a really amazing talk, and like the stuff that you guys are working on is unreal. So I'm an industrial mechanic, and I actually work in these plants like constantly, and I see, like, I'm very tech savvy. Lots of other guys that I work with definitely are not. So trying to keep it super user friendly and really simple is like definitely a way to reach out. So is there, I see like you're using whole plant simulations and stuff like that. Are you like, is there looking into actually taking like critical equipment and actually like going into breaking that down and actually using that as a training tool? Because like there's lots of equipment we work on that, like, if you do it wrong, people die. And like more than just hooking a valve up, actually pulling a pump apart and that sort of thing. Like, is that kind of the future of where this is going?
Yeah, exactly. And that is pretty much exactly what we're doing with Exxon right now. Full time is building sims and sims and sims and wrapping this up. And the challenge we're hitting now is some of those processes change so quickly that in a month or two, 3 of the steps have changed. Like our teal cylinder replacement for Exxon, it's a 300-step process, hydrofluoric liquid that if it touches air or water, it's flammable, which is like, how do you replace one of those? How do you replace one of those, right? And you're pumping nitrogen down stuff and teaching something that can walk you through all of that. Because the thing for me, especially when I was a medic, we didn't have a way to safely try those things. So you're just sitting in a vehicle waiting for an injury, reading your textbook over and over again and hoping you understand how to save somebody's life. And I felt that way when I was in construction as well, because a lot of times you're doing it for the first time or the second time, you know, like you're going to work on something or build something or assemble something, and one little mistake might not even cause a problem today. It might cause an injury 3 months down the line, and the person who did it's gone. So it's a huge opportunity. And the other thing is we do some work with mixed reality, which is stuff like this, where it's more like glasses, so that we do that, like our work, we have some work we're doing with our sister studio in the South in Air Force and repair work, where they put the goggles on and it shows them overlays of what's happening. And what's really cool about the mixed reality is we can see the last person's view. So you can see video recordings of the last person who worked on that. And you can also detect if pins are out of place or if a particular part has failed. So as soon as you look at it, information comes up that tells you this part's been replaced 32 times. This pin's in red because it's out of place. And the last guy who worked on it recorded this message. Do you want to listen to this? And you got an engineer saying, this thing's terrible. Why do we still have this 42-year-old piece of equipment we're maintaining? And so the capability goes into training and then spills into augmenting the world around us so that we get smarter and better. And so, yeah, it's such a fascinating thing when we're talking about industrial tech, because like, oh man, the sky's the limit on where you can go with that stuff.
I love hearing about the crossover between VR and AR. It's so hard to discuss one without the other. So it's great that you've got both that you're considering for your solutions. We have David Moody with a question here. Do you have any recommendations for a training company trying to leverage 360 video for training? Where is 360 video valuable in VR environment, and what cautions do you have for overuse or incorrect use of it?
Great example. I should send you a link because we've done a bunch of 360 video. It's usually, it's kind of really depends. So where I found 360 worked surprisingly well was things like vehicle securement, or we have a video for securing wheelchairs for special buses that's being used by a school here. And the reason why that's important is because in 360, you can see every clasp all around you, and the instructor is able to walk around and show you how to connect each clasp, when they're tight, when they're loose. And it's not that you can't do that in a traditional video, but it's just a lot easier to see where those clasps are in relation to where you're standing, so that when they start that first day of work, they've gone through the video 2 or 3 times. Where it gets to be a little tougher is 360 video, because of the massive amount of content that's around you and streaming, you really only get about 10 to 15 minutes of record time that you can get longer than that, but the data gets massive. What I do think, and this is just my personal opinion, is that the 360 VR industry for training has been grossly underestimated and grossly undertouched. I think that we rely so much on traditional film footage that it doesn't occur to us that we're living in a box when we do that, and we're missing all of that information around us that is what a real person goes through, and it gets you so much closer to real training. So to me, I think 360, what I will say to that is more that I think it's just a really untapped and untested market. I know there's a lot of companies that do it. We've done a lot. I've seen a lot done, but I feel like everybody there has just still only scratched the surface. I think, especially when we're talking 360 video with choice, because you can mix 360 with the ability to make like a choose your own adventure decisions. And when you start getting into those kind of scenarios where they get the freedom to explore things and more information, that training gets to be immensely valuable. Yeah.
Thank you. I know a hot button topic has been in the VR community, spatial audio, and you talk about audio being part of the learning process. Have you integrated spatial audio to your training simulators? Have you found this beneficial?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything we do has spatial audio, even Muffin Fight. And it's because it goes back to that realism. When somebody yells my name, I expect, like, I'm very odd, like, in my family, I have the best hearing. So for me, sound matters a lot more. We did some tests in our first year when we were purely a horror video game company, where we would do live demos at events with purely visual. So the aliens come tearing after you, and people would be like, oh, okay. But then we did the opposite, and the aliens wouldn't come after you, but the sound did. And you'd hear the thumps and the storming of them coming after you in 3D, and people would freak out. We had one guy on YouTube hide in the closet in the video game for like 10 minutes because he didn't want to come out. And it's like, he didn't know he was running the demo that we were experimenting with only audio. So it's like, nothing's going to jump out, but just the sound of it was so terrifying. But the flip side of that is sound drives far more than we see, because we also see in a box, but we hear all around us all the time. And so it's something that we use for learning constantly of our environment, because I think as a survival mechanism, hearing is what let us know something was coming more often than visual. So we're very aware of the sounds around us for the most part. And I think that spatial audio is probably, and I'm probably going to get some hate for this statement, I would say that like high quality audio is more important than graphical look, even in VR when you have a screen in front of your face.
Absolutely. I'm going to throw it to Mike. He's got a question for you.
Sure.
Hey, I just want to first say amazing talk. I actually learned quite a bit because we're in this kind of world right now with what some of the research projects we're doing. But my question I have is regarding the performance metrics within VR training, and kind of that assessment piece. And first off, do you create your own in-house kind of performance metrics system, or do you use some third-party solutions? And then what are some of the key considerations when measuring and assessing within VR training?
Yeah, so, and that's such a fascinating thing because there's companies dedicated to that stuff now, which is just mind blowing on its own. A company dedicating to analytics and information pulled out of VR sims, and it's become an industry for them. And that's what's so fascinating to me is that when you start getting niche companies like that, that tells you that your industry is doing well. But for us, yeah, like Unity does have a built-in profiler, which is pretty accurate. You know that you got to hit your 90 frames per second, and we have a checklist that we use internally. So like if you're, for the techie people in the room, if you're in Unity, try to keep below 1 million polygons and try to keep, if you can, below maybe 150 batch calls. There's little buttons that'll tell you this information. If you can stay below those two, you're always, if there's a lag or if there's a problem at that point, it's always going to be your code because your models and your environment's fine. If you're going to the Oculus Quest, there's one of these guys. Oh, yeah, you can't see nothing. It's getting blurred out by my camera. Because it's Android driven, you've got about a third or a quarter as much bandwidth. So I try really hard to get our models to be less than 250,000 polygons for the entire environment that you're seeing. And there's a bunch of tricks and hacks we do for that. So for us, we treat it as a checklist. So I'll pull it open. We'll do a bunch of spot checks and I'll make sure that where you're looking is only rendering no more than it's supposed to. And I really feel it out, which is probably the worst way to do that. Because the company's growing, and so it's getting harder for me to stay on top of full-bodied QA across all the products. But it is definitely having a checklist and goals and guidelines for the team that they need to follow. We have our artists go through and make sure that if there's a junior artist, they're kind of doing things right. Brady, for example, is phenomenal. So he's exactly the kind of guy I would put on a project to go check the quality of the art and make sure that it's performant. And you kind of get your key people who are good at those things. And then internally, we do have like some things, like I have a system where it'll send information back to us to let us know if we can remotely update the software for like Exxon. So if we find a critical error in the simulator, we can replace it from Calgary. We don't do that. We haven't had to do that before, but it is there if we need it. But more importantly, it's capturing, and it's funny because they call it more like error reporting, but I think that analytics and error reporting and all of that performance metrics, they're all the same thing and they should be combined into one common place, because I shouldn't have to go to 3 different places to gather that data. So we don't do it for all of our projects, but we feed that back to our back end. Because this kind of goes to our earlier conversation of the challenge we're having where our simulators, we're finding that they need 3 or 4 things changed in the step system. And I don't want to have them have to come through us and wait a month for a fix. So we're starting to build backends that allow us to change the orders of steps. So when they call us, we click, 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 and it updates to the headsets and we don't have to rebuild anything. And that's the same pipeline we're using for bug reporting and analytics. So I'll get a notification if there's a crash or an issue or something's not hitting the performance metrics. It'll send me device information back. But we don't do that for all our clients because we're kind of anal about the anti-information gathering. So those are ones where typically we would turn it on the client's request. So I usually disable it by default. We do have a couple scenarios where we know that especially in the medical stuff or our multiplayer stuff where latency can make somebody nauseous, we're more likely to force analytics there because we want to catch it before it gets to the complaints. But yeah, it's all in-house stuff and it shouldn't be. This should be stuff that we could pull off a shelf and do for next to nothing. But yeah, we've been kind of building it all in-house. Sometimes we're lazy or busy and we do things the hard way. So I'm not saying there isn't something smarter, but pardon me.
We have another question about audio actually here from Sam Krabani.
Sure.
As it relates to the hardware that you've been using, have you experienced issues with the audio creating problems for mobile devices like the Oculus Quest or other hardware devices? Are there specific hardware platforms you prefer to use?
Oh, good question. I wouldn't say there's problems, but I would say that there's better technology at times. What I would say is that there's limitations still that is difficult. Like most of the game engines out of the box can't make something sound muffled behind a wall very easily. So spatial audio in terms of the environment is something that there's solutions for, but they're like, you're relying on somebody else's code to make that work. And quite often it's somebody in a basement, which was like me 6 or 7 years ago, who built a little tool that you're relying on. And as those things get more into the game engines where they become built in, that's really going to be exciting. But I'd say like for the audio, for headsets and stuff like that, there are some issues more in terms of the hardware that might have a failure. I know that, I think it was some of the, I don't know about the Quest, but I know some of the early Rifts, I think it was, had some speaker problems. So there was some kind of hit or miss there. But on the game engine side, we haven't noticed anything. What I will say though is, I'll put a caveat on there, which is anything that's a PC VR, so like one of these things, or the Rift, is you're relying on long cables. You're relying on Steam VR being able to process and send audio to the headset, which then is also deciding whether or not it's going to mirror it to the desktop because you're trying to show it on a screen. And that's all being processed. Like there's so many steps in that process that the bigger problem with the older equipment especially is there's so many points of failure that it's really easy to break. Something that's more like one of the Quests has no cables. So there's less, it's either a hardware fault or it isn't, or it's a game engine version bug that somebody hasn't fixed, or because this is Android, there's a chance that your codec, like the form of the audio, is not converting over properly. We've had that problem with video quite a few times. So we have some guidelines we use internally for the formats and sizes and exactly how we want our multimedia folks to cut up and prepare our video and audio to make sure that the codec doesn't become a problem.
Thanks so much. And not a question, but it looks like we have a few people in the chat that might be interested in working with you / hiring you at some point. So if you have a moment, maybe pop your contact information in the Zoom chat there. So if anyone,
sure,
they can reach out to you. Our next question though, here, sorry, I'm trying not to miss any of your awesome questions. Brent, in your opinion, what is the ratio of studios that can create strong industrial VR content compared to the number of enterprises that will be requiring content creation in the next 2 to 5 years? In other words, will content creation be a bottleneck in the coming years? Absolutely.
I'll even say it is now, especially with COVID, because all the training that's happening that used to happen in a classroom with 20 people sitting there at a training session at Suncor, they're at home now. And they don't have a way to, they're relying on Zoom, which is great for conference. It's great for presentation. But again, it ignores those hands-on trainers. So we're, if anything, and it's interesting because Alberta's different. So Alberta's very conservative. Suncor, and I don't blame them, they've been bombarded by VR studios and problems with studios. So they're very hesitant. Syncrude's much more open. But I don't blame them because it's a series of things that get you where you are. What we're finding in the US is the opposite. The demand there for us has been, I've never had to go in and explain the value of VR training to a company down there. It's like, as soon as you come in, the question is, can they afford it? Can they, it's never a question of the value. And in Alberta, it always becomes a question of value. But I would say like what we're seeing is there's an abundance of companies trying to take old Flash content. How do we wrap this into VR as fast as we can? And having very little idea of even who to talk to, let alone how to do that. And what's very fascinating is they're all going through a very similar process where about 5 years ago, they tried to do it in-house for a year or two and it didn't work. And so they have started looking for outsourcing. And so a lot of times we end up inheriting some projects in the process where, somebody tried, and it's not their fault. It's trying to learn an entire industry in a year is challenging on any platform. Something like VR, which is a hybrid of coding, multimedia, you need to know audio, you need to know all that stuff. It's all very learnable, but you got to be super passionate. And so it's, yeah, I think I gave you the longest answer possible of saying there's huge value. What I'll say is that's where Red Iron gets probably 60% of its revenue. Actually, not this year, but typically we've gotten the majority of our revenue through critical safety and process training. And that's only really started to change in the last year or so.
That's really great you mentioned that. As a VR marketing consultant, I've worked with a variety of different industries: healthcare, oil and gas, arts, culture, social VR. Has there been an industry that's been more receptive to adopting your technology than others? Or has there been one where you say this is a fantastic technology and you just have been hitting a wall time after time?
Yeah, great question. The answer is yes. And the other thing is it depends a lot on the audience. And this is the same thing I saw when I was in a medic, by the way, which is if you go to a job site that's had an accident, they are going to push training and safety to the wall. You go to a site that's never had that problem and they're going to think it's a useless endeavor. And the reality is a lot of companies have had problems or issues or safety concerns. So those walls have become much more worn down. The easier ones for us have been, for sure, anything that's critical safety training, anything that's strategic. So if we're talking about getting 5 firefighters to plan out what would it take to like come up with a plan to get people out of a building, like maybe it's augmented reality or mixed reality, those are much easier conversations. Medical training is a much easier conversation because there's a lot of experimentation. And what medical is very fascinating to me about is I'm excited about like all of the extended reality, but that's the visualizer. I'm getting excited that we're starting to mix machine learning in there, because for me, I just can't wait until we start utilizing machine learning to filter blood, because it can find viruses that a bacteria can't, or that like it has the potential to cure things we can't traditionally just by filtering blood through an AI. And then you can also use VR as a visualizer to get in there. And so I'm thinking like 10 or 20 years down the road, it's going to solve problems that we haven't even thought of. But in the meantime, medical training and safety training, marketing for sure, video games, conferences, anything that's combining people that need to use hands-on things, anything dealing with apprenticeships, vehicle maintenance. We've done a lot with transportation and safety. So you get this giant big rig in VR, you got to tie everything down. And if you get it wrong, you watch it tip over as it goes. So all of those learning things, that anything that's hands-on and really expensive is probably a good fit to try in VR at a fraction of the price. And those conversations get to be a lot easier, especially once they see that you have stuff behind you and they're like, okay, you can do it. It's a lot cheaper. And we need to get this demo out in 2 months, though it'll get a lot easier to kick that door down.
Absolutely. I've even seen COVID modeling in VR as a means to study COVID and the effect on the lungs. So there's definitely new opportunities now with our healthcare expanding.
Absolutely.
Robert Solier, I hope I pronounced your name right, has a question. Do you have a preferred 3D modeling software for assets? Does your company have one used by everyone, or leave it up to employees to use their preferred software?
Oh yeah, we do this the wrong way. I'll tell you that right away. Shane, who's my lead animator, and he does all of our organic NPCs. He uses Modo. Me and Matthew use Blender. Me, Matthew, and Brady use Blender. Or sorry, me, Matthew, and Brent use Blender. Brady uses Maya, and then Mark, who's from EA Games, uses AutoCAD. Or sorry. Yeah, I think it's AutoCAD. So like we have a huge variety. What I do instead is I mandate what the file formats are going to be and what my checklist is for it to pass inspection. That way they feel encouraged to use the program they want. And we did try to force everybody down Blender before. Blender's my favorite. If I had a choice, it would be Blender across the board, because I would rather give $1,000 to an open source company than $1,000 to Autodesk, who I love dearly, but they don't need it as much as Blender. But at the same time, like, it really depends on where they're going. Because if you're getting into AAA games, you got to learn Autodesk, all of their projects, all of their products. If you're getting into engineering, you got to learn Autodesk. Navisworks, SolidWorks, all of that. It's unavoidable, it's necessary, and they do a really good job. For a VR studio, Blender, Maya, all of those will get you by just fine. But Blender and Maya are probably the most common, with Blender probably being ahead because it's free. So most studios start with 2 people in a basement. So they're going to start with the free software and work their way up.
And Mike Lohaus and I actually share the same question here. He says, amazing talk as always. What are some of the new VR, AR technologies that are on the horizon you're excited about playing around with or even implementing in future projects?
Yes, and this is where I'm going to differ from most people because we have a bunch, like about 2016, 2015 is when I first started seeing contact lens size AR, which I know is getting closer to like body modification type stuff.
Mojo.
And I am 100% going to buy those the second that I think they're ready. But the truth is, like, I'm going to reflect back to what Mark Zuckerberg said in around 2016, 2015. And he said his vision, he's like, Facebook as an entity needs to react to VR now. And he said the reason they need to is because one day all of the headsets are going to be gone, all of the watches, all of the phones, all of the TVs, all of the computers, because the end state for that is to not need external technology. It'll be augmenting on us in some way. And we know that that's a long journey, but we do know that there's steps along that process. So for me, I think right now, I'm very excited. I love how the Quest 2 has changed the industry again. And I'm really excited to see how the next iteration going beyond that, because every time it gets more convenient, costs less, it's easier to get into people's hands, it's funner, it's cooler. But like, I don't know what I'm not thinking the Quest 3, but I'm thinking more like the next mutation, which is going to probably be a hybrid of mixed reality and virtual reality that allows full blackening of the screen so that you can do both. Has got to be probably the last step before we start moving into some completely new lens-based technology. So I would say anybody who's working in augmented reality, anybody who's working in virtual reality, your worlds are going to merge very, 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 very soon. And we're seeing that across the board. Unity does VR and AR built in. So
amazing. I know when I was in, I guess the last time we were allowed to go to CES,
yeah,
the Mojo lenses, the contact lenses, I had an opportunity to demo one of those at CES, which was phenomenal. I'm very excited for the moment that we can just have AR visibly integrated into your body. It's going to be very cool.
Like everything I dreamt about when I was like 6, but now it's actually possible. So, but I feel that way about the whole industry in general. Like, I think we are now limited by our ability to be creative. I don't think we're limited by technology anymore. I think if you want to figure out how to cure cancer by using AI and filtering blood systems, go for it. I think it's doable now. I think we're limited. We used to put a lot of work into making a Nintendo game run on like 8 kilobytes of memory. We're talking gigabytes now. Like, we got to be able to change the world. So
100%. You're talking about healthcare earlier. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit, has COVID impacted your business? Has it changed who you serve? Are people more receptive to VR training now than they were before?
And it's interesting because I think there's the Canadianized thing and also the small business ego thing where you don't want to always show your cards and talk about the truth of what's happening. But the reality is, yeah, absolutely. Like, Red Iron got hit and we are so lucky. So when I said at the beginning to get your company working in 3 revenue streams, that's what saved us, because right around when COVID hit, my partner and I, we both had the flu. So we started getting everybody working from home because we had the flu. And then COVID hit. And we haven't been back to the office since. When it hit, we were in a weird spot because we had too much work. We had a long contract with Exxon, and I know I'm giving too much info, but I think people need to know so they brace themselves. So we had a long dedicated contract with Exxon. We had a contract with Shell for some projects coming up. We had other contracts that were on the go. So we were like thinking, we're not only stable, like, we've got coverage, we're good, this is going to be a great year, everything's good, nothing could hit us, we're going to be great. And then COVID hit. Shell put their projects on hold. Exxon found a contract thing that they didn't realize was in the contract that made them put all of the projects on hold, not just us, industry wide, which caused some of the VR studios they were working with to shut down that didn't have a plan B. And so some of my team members here were part of this, so they know this as well as I do. We get this message that like, hey, all of your project, like 8 of your developers and team is now on hold. And then all of the fallback work we had lined up was on hold. And so we just sat there and went, okay, let's build Muffin Fight, and among other things. So we were fortunate enough to have options to get funding through whatever means we could to pay the team and keep them learning and building and keep them employed. And we got lucky because we had medical backing, we had education backing us, we had some of our own apps and games backing us. And it sounds dumb, but these little $500 here or there, or $5,000 here or there, or what really saved us though, because we went through and looked at the numbers, was small businesses. It was all of the little entrepreneurs that came to us with a 1 and 2 person shop with an idea. Nobody would listen to them. And Red Iron said, we'll chase an Alberta Innovates with you. We'll take our grants people. We'll sit down. We'll go through this with you. And no word of a lie, that is, I think, what saved our company at the time, at least kept us afloat. And we're still seeing the impact today. Like, we still have a rocky trying to get back into it, but we have a green light in front of us and a path forward. What it did do, because that's all the negative, but there was a positive because we survived. And the reason we survived is, like I said, clients and projects and ideas and these things. And we survived because of the diversification, but we also survived because of certain industries. Education didn't go anywhere. Healthcare needed a lot more out of people. And the small businesses that were so desperate to try to find a way to do enhanced training and change their business and change their business model suddenly got forced into it. So we saw a huge demand increase for social VR, multi-user, multiplayer connectivity. And a lot of the projects we're finishing now are a reaction to that, definitely. And then partnerships like Lethbridge College. It's all about all those things that people think, like, your company's investing in community and doing these things, turn back to what kind of saved us and kept us running. So I don't know, I guess my long answer is follow your heart, because that worked for us. So far.
Got that, follow your heart.
Yeah, knock on wood, right? Because you never know what's going to happen nowadays, but yeah.
We have another question in the chat here from Michael McNamara. He says he's wondering if you've worked with any interfaces that will manipulate graphics in real time through feedback from a system or machine, etc. For example, an actual fan that is having trouble spinning and its graphical representation shows in real time.
Yeah, I'm going to say yes on 2 fronts, but because there's, like I said, there's the mixed reality work happening with our sister studio in the US for Air Force and military, mostly around repair work. So like I said, we're using HoloLens and using the Third Eye headsets and the reason we're using Third Eye is because they're military grade, so they can't be shattered, which is the reason why. But they're doing that where they're checking pins and filtering images to understand what, like, not just replicate it to somebody, but to show the person on the field that something's going too fast. So a fan would be perfect. It would tell you, yeah, your RPM is 3 times faster than it's supposed to be, or 2 times faster, so that it highlights it in red right away, and the repair technician knows there's a problem, especially in safety, because you don't want them to stick their hand in it. The other time we've done we do a lot of graphic manipulation in general, because it's a fun industry, interesting industry when we're talking about the creative side of Red Iron. But the other thing is Metaplex, which is, it's like laser tag for VR. And the way we did that there is, I got one in here somewhere. It's a little laser scanner that we built a faceplate for headsets. And so they walk around and there's little QR codes everywhere, and it maps out the environment and you can see all the players. And so you put the headset on and you're in a virtual game fighting against other people. And that one it's still proof of concept, but that one you can move the markers around. So their staff can move the markers around to resize walls and resize things. And Luke is demoing that out in Toronto. But that one's much more about using QR codes to manipulate what's going on in VR, which is a very similar technology to what's going on with the mixed reality stuff. So I think that is similar. Yeah, I'll stand by that statement.
Thank you. Does anybody else have another question before we begin to wrap things up? I just want to open it wide up to the audience. If not, I've got one more.
Excellent. I feel bad because I took longer. I talk a lot, so getting me to be quiet is the hard part. as I always say.
The reason we come is to hear you talk, so you shouldn't feel bad about that. That's
I
kind of
guess, yeah. If I was quiet, I'd be sad if there was no questions. So,
well, I'll ask my next question then, since everybody else seems to have run out. I'm curious to know what's next for Red Iron Labs. What is your vision for the future of the organization?
yeah, and this is something we discuss frequently. Like our goal at the end of the day is to become a memorable technology company for Alberta. We want to stop bleeding students out of the province. We want Calgary and Alberta to recognize that you can have a creative technology industry. When we founded Red Iron, we couldn't get support for the life of us. We tried to find investors, that didn't work. We tried to pitch ourselves to people, that didn't work. And everybody kept telling us the same thing, which is like, it's an interesting idea, but I don't think it's plausible. To which I want to say, hey, 5 years, we're still here. So I think like for Red Iron's growth, like what we're trying to figure out, we don't want to grow more as a company particularly. We feel like if it gets anytime we get any bigger than we are now, it's a huge amount of stress trying to manage all those people, because you're responsible for so many people as owners, and it's a terrifying experience. I'm sure that half the people in the room understand that, especially the people who are staff on that understand that stress. So it's not a growth thing, but for sure, like we want to find a way to make sure that the province recognizes that maybe it's too late for them to invest and build up Red Iron. We got lucky and found our path, but every other studio that came after us that couldn't get that funding, I would love to see Red Iron inspire that change so that the next Red Iron can pop up and say, we have this idea. And an investor goes, hey, you know what? I've seen that succeed before. There's value in putting money into this XR industry of some kind. And if we accomplish that, I think that we will be beyond our wildest dreams of having met our goals. And I know that that doesn't answer like product wise where we're going. This year we're focused on multiplayer, but every year we change our vision and our scope. I think at the end of the day, it's just about trying to figure out how do we retain those companies and retain that staff and build Calgary and Alberta up to work together and keep everybody here and employed and share work. Like if we get overworked, why go hire somebody for 2 months? Let's give that contract to a small company that needs it. Let's, balance the work around all of us so that we kind of work together. And last thing I'll say there is one thing I love about Alberta that I don't see any other place except for our US studio and the companies who are around there is, and I love 3D Media and the work we do there. They're a good example of amazing companies. Is like us, Mammoth and VisWorks, we share work and projects among each other all the time. And I've never seen an industry where you have three that should be competitors working arm in arm like that and learning from each other and helping each other and trying to see how that's changing the province is very fascinating to me, because it's like an industry driven community change that happens. And then we got supportive people like yourself, like Mike, who come from the education side, and it's like it becomes a trifecta of creating students, creating jobs, creating industry, and proving that Alberta doesn't have to be a bunch of oil and gas workers. We can be oil and gas workers with mixed reality, or we can, like it doesn't mean yes or no. It means let's adapt and evolve and move up a level. And yeah, that's my long answer. I'm sticking to it.
A wonderful vision, and it perfectly exemplifies what makes you such a valuable and wonderful part of our Alberta VRARA ecosystem and a member of our associations. We're really grateful that you take your time to come and speak with everyone here today. We had over 40 attendees today, so thank you all for taking your time to come and attend this talk and learn more about Red Iron Labs. If you want to learn more about the VRARA, if you're interested in becoming a member, you want to ask us a few questions, you can reach out to alberta@thevrara.com. I threw the email into the chat there for you as well. But thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.